Seems like these dag-nabbit whippersnappers are trading in their real bass players for these newfangled Macintosh computing devices in their parents' spare bedrooms. I cannot see without these. But I, for one, happen to love a good synth bass, so I guess I'll leave those kinds of videos for other people. But if we are going to rely heavily on synthy basses, then I guess maybe we should figure out how to make them cut through a mix and not just seem like an afterthought, actually serve a purpose, and I don't know, make the parts more interesting so that we finally break out of that 4-bar loop that everyone seems to hate. In my last video on arpeggios, you can't click on that, it's just a PNG file, I mentioned that we can change the entire feel of a chord progression or ARP progression. I'll include that video in the end screen so you can click on it, just by changing the bass line or the bass notes of each chord underneath. We'll focus mostly on synth bass in this video, but the harmony portion of the video towards the end, that will translate to any instrumentation that you can possibly think of. Back when I started making electronic music, which was only about 10 years ago or so, I fell in love with sawtooth waves. They're really buzzy, have lots of high harmonics, and allowed me to pretend to be Rick Wakeman and shred mini-moog solos like he did in all of my favorite Yes songs. But they could also be shaved down with a low-pass filter to become a sine wave, basically. So lots of versatility, and therefore I started using them for everything, including my bass lines. But a lot of times I noticed when I would listen to my friend Tony Anderson's tracks that I could not get the same kind of earth-shattering subs that he was getting, and I didn't know how he was doing it at the time, but eventually I learned that he was layering things with some sort of sub-bass that could produce those frequencies, probably a sine wave. So I started layering a sawtooth wave, and I'd remove all of the low frequencies. I've done this in a lot of my tracks. And then I just put a sine wave sub underneath that. Because it doesn't have any high frequencies, they would work together pretty well. This is a fairly common technique. It's not earth-shattering. It's just something I had to figure out on my own. It works. It definitely works. But I found something recently that I like even better. The humble square wave. I had been modulating it for years because Nick Batt had told me to. If you know, you know. Turns out the square wave has a more solid fundamental than a sawtooth wave, and still produces a lot of those high mids frequencies, the harmonics, that help it cut through the mix, so it can kind of achieve both things at once. And while layering can work, I think if you're working on budget speakers and you can't really hear the low end very well, which was definitely the case for me when I started out, then that can be dangerous because you don't know exactly where that crossover point is. You don't know where there might be buildup happening that your room or your speakers are not revealing to you. So this is a simpler way to get a similar result. I've been doing a lot of things lately with just 2 synthesizers that I'm performing at the same time. And therefore I'm playing it live. I don't go back and multi-track it. So I want something that has that presence, but also has the solid foundation in the low end. And the square wave is working wonderfully for that. You can make space for your bass just by doing less around it. And that shouldn't really be groundbreaking, but for me, it usually is because I tend to try to do too much. And then my mixes get too busy, too crowded, and I end up having to go back and subtract things. Well, you could just leave space to begin with. Arrangement has a huge impact on mixing and how the whole production fits together. That's why I spend so much time talking about composition and that process and getting things right in that stage of the process before you get to the point where you've caused problems for yourself later on. Just spending a little bit of time considering how things might work as a conversation with each other can be really effective and save you tons of time in the mixing and mastering stages later. And you know how much I love working in an organ analogy whenever I can. In most well-written organ music, we might have a really busy pedal part, or our bass. We might also have really busy stuff going on in the hands, or the manuals. But if you study some organ music, it's usually not happening at the same time. It's conversational. They're taking turns. This is super clear in a piece that I'm currently reviving that I played in the past, the Bach D major fugue. It's one of my favorite fugues of his. And you can clearly see that even though it has a very busy fugue subject, when Bach puts it in the feet for the pedals, the stuff in the manuals is more spacious. There's more room to breathe around that. And vice versa also. When it goes to the fugue subject, which is very busy being in the manuals with the hands, the feet are just kind of punctuating, kind of providing the chord movement underneath. So how in the world does that apply to electronic music production? Well, if we have a lot of busy stuff going on in the lows and the low mids, maybe we don't have as much busy stuff going on in the upper registers, and vice versa. If the mids and highs are very busy, maybe we should chill out with our bass and let it anchor us and provide the harmonic foundation. The only thing that I love more than relating organ music to synthesizers is harmony. And the thing that I love about doing less is that you can't hide within the busyness. Every move that you make is important because you can hear them all. And therefore, it's actually a lot harder to write something that's just 2 or 3 or 4 parts like a chorale than it is to write something with big massive chords. There's places to hide within those big chords or fast arpeggios or something. Not a lot of room to hide in something that's very exposed. So we have to choose our notes more carefully, and therefore our bass line is extremely important. As an organist, that's 2-in-1 video, there are these moments where when you're playing a piece and because you're playing the bass line with your feet most of the time, a certain harmony will lock into place. And because you're playing the room and you have these massive 16 and 32 foot pipes to support you down below, you can feel when a harmony locks into place just right. And it's almost a spiritual experience. And if you can put a bunch of those experiences in a row in a chord progression, that is the kind of bass line that I'm looking to achieve. It's not about being virtuosic or super busy with the bass line. It's about choosing the right note that locks in the vertical above it. Sometimes there's more than one note that we can choose for each vertical or each chord. And that's what I was kind of referencing in that arpeggios video. So in that chord progression that I had just written for the ARP video, I can keep the chords in the right hand exactly the same, and I can just change the bass line beneath it to really get what feels like a new set of chords, a new chord progression. And I've changed nothing but the bass underneath. This is where trial and error comes in, which is a lot of what composition is all about. experimenting with these concepts and ideas, because you'll find that you like some more than others. Some will be more effective than others. But if you can find two good options, then suddenly you have two chord progressions. And then the options start to open up for you. Maybe one could be the A section, and the next could be the B section. Maybe the whole thing becomes an 8-bar phrase instead of a 4-bar phrase, which is that loop that we were trying to break out of at the beginning. Whatever we choose to do, it will give this progression a sense of forward momentum and movement, like we're going somewhere, a sense of development. So if you're struggling to find a new set of chords, maybe you don't need a new set of chords. Maybe you need to find a new set of bass notes to go underneath those chords, because the bass will transform the vertical above it. If you don't know what I'm talking about by verticals and linear versus horizontal writing and all of these kinds of things that I reference in these videos, I do have a free ebook on harmony specifically, because I love talking about it, and it's one of the most important and impactful things that impacts everything we do as composers. All of the choices we make with our progressions, our melodies, our bass lines, everything. That's the first link in the description, and it is yours for free if you would like to download it. If you want to check out how I created the arpeggiated variations on that chord progression that I was just playing, you can check out this video right here where I talk more about that.